Hey guys, it's Gary again. I know I was going to try not to do a video today, um, but I tried not to, but I failed. So, I've noticed that since I started doing these videos and I'm revisiting these artists, and I'm not doing it in any kind of order, I'm just kind of randomly choosing and doing people that I, love and whatever that I can think of at the moment, but also ones that I can find the various records and CDs that I want to show. Now, invariably, every single time I do these, I did the Terry Riley one a while back. Found about, I don't know, like 6 more Terry Riley CDs that I had, a bunch of albums that I didn't show on vinyl by Terry Riley. This keeps happening. Happened with Mark Isham a few days ago. I found a whole bunch of soundtracks that I didn't show. I thought I'd pulled them all. But in addition to that, things tend to start coming up with these artists. I did the Gary Peacock one yesterday, and Carm sends me an email and says, "Hey, I just discovered that Gary Peacock's got an album coming out as a leader, which is not something that happens a lot. I mean, his albums as a leader are pretty much few and far between. He does co-lead things, but he's usually a supporting player." And Carm sent me an email saying there's a trio album coming out on ECM next month. And the funny thing is, I had discovered that myself just a few hours prior to that when I went on a search on Amazon to take a look, because I know I missed many things that Peacock has done on my video, and my videos tend to be more like partially my experience and the albums that I actually do have. So, my impressions of those albums, I don't necessarily intend them to be, a complete career overview or discography or anything. But it's weird, because Peacock does not come out with many albums as a leader. He's about to turn 80, so you can expect work to slow down a bit. I have a couple videos planned, several, and I can't find the vinyl, and it's making me hesitate to show them. Excuse me. But this next one I found, pretty much everything I'm looking for. Tomorrow I think I'm going to do one that's going to be very short on the band Double Image. Maybe I shouldn't ruin the surprise, but I'm going to try to do a Double Image one tomorrow. That'll be pretty short because it's not. I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge necessarily of their stuff. Today, and I will try to keep this short, I'm going to do Azimuth, not to be confused with Azimuth. Unfortunately, there's 2 bands named Azimuth. One spells it Azimuth, which is the one I'm talking about, who records for ECM Records. And there's a Brazilian trio, kind of like a jazz rock fusion trio, called Azimuth, that spells it Azymuth. Kind of weird that, and they coexisted at the same time. They were both around in the 70s and the early 80s and stuff. So that was unusual. I'm sure there's people that picked one up thinking they were getting the other. So what is this? Because there's no real relation musically. They both kind of fall into the jazz category, maybe. Both primarily led by keyboard players. That's the only similarity. I can enjoy both, but for me, I mean, the ECM band is it. How did I discover them? Well, if you go back to my Eberhard Weber video that I did a few days ago, one of my favorite albums of all time of his was Fluid Russell, which is I referred to as one of his composed albums versus a band album. And it had 2 vocalists on it, singing wordless vocals. And that was my introduction to both of the female vocalists that were on that album. One of them was Norma Winstone, which was the first time I had heard her, actually. But, and I just randomly opened up this disc to see if this had one of the ECM catalogs that I'm always referring to, and sure enough it does. And like I'm always saying, brilliant idea, because my love of the musicians that play on these individual albums leads me to quite often seek them out to see what else they've done. Have they done things as leaders, etc., etc. So through my enjoyment of Fluid Russell and the various musicians supporting, that play on that album, like Gary Burton and Norma Winstone, Bill Frisell, leads me right back to these old ECM catalogs that they used to include in all their vinyls, and I found that Norma Winstone was part of this group called Azimuth. I'll bite, whatever. I love this stuff, you know. But oddly, I had heard the main composer of the group and the leader of the group is pianist John Taylor. I had heard John Taylor already play on two Jan Garbarek albums, Jan Garbarek group albums that he did in 77 and 78. I might have only actually purchased at that time maybe one of the Jan Garbarek albums, but I heard John Taylor, so you know, slight familiarity with John Taylor, the pianist, the leader of the group. Norma Winstone I had heard of, Flew with Russell, and the only person that I hadn't heard of until probably when I bought the album was somebody who recently passed away, trumpeter Kenny Wheeler. Talk about a velvet tone on trumpet. What a beautiful, expressive, not an avant-garde trumpet. He wasn't, you know, doing like a Lester Bowie and, you know, or Don Cherry and, you know, playing like wild sounds on the trumpet, which I love, but Kenny Wheeler had more of a I hate to use the word conservative because it's not a bad thing in this context, but he plays a trumpet in more, and flugelhorn a bit too, in more of a traditional way. But if you've ever heard, you know, the term that a trumpeter sounds velvety, this guy is the definition of that. I've never heard a softer tone anywhere, and he kept it, you know, through his whole career. And he passed away not that long ago, in the last year or so, not even a year, I don't think. So I started with the first album that I recorded in March '77, the first Azimuth album. Norma Winstone on vocals, Kenny Wheeler on trumpet and flugelhorn, John Taylor on piano, acoustic piano, and synthesizer. This is the only album, and I'm pretty sure it's the only time John Taylor has ever played synthesizer. He has played electric organ, but I've never seen him play synthesizer anywhere else. It turns out this is my favorite Azimuth album, probably because of the synthesizer. It's an early monophonic synthesizer that he uses basically. He doesn't really play it. He creates sequences on it. And then the sequences are played over, sometimes, you know, with some little piano solos, but most of the sequences are actually created for Norma Winstone to do some improvised voice things over, and Kenny Wheeler to play trumpet and flugelhorn things over. Very, you know, they're repetitive, but they're very pretty. It's monophonic things, so it's a single line going on. And talk about late night music. Oh my God, this is it. This, not only this album, but especially I think the two or three longest tracks are the ones with the sequencer synthesizer thing. The synthesizer sequences sound almost exactly like the ones that John Sermon uses. The horn player, John Sermon, when he would record all solo albums, where he would do a lot of overdubbing of horns and things like that, would use a synthesizer as well. And he had an early monophonic synthesizer. Sounds like it's even the same synthesizer, to be honest. And he would create this very similar, almost exactly the same type of sequences, these, you know, little monophonic sequences to play over, and they work fantastic. I love John Sermon's use of synthesizer, and John Taylor, the pianist here, I love it as well, and yet he never used it again. Very, very disappointed that he never used it again. And especially, you know, nowadays, it would be, even if he did go back to it, it would be a completely different thing because synthesizers have changed so much. This is a late night album. This is an album that, if you're up and you don't have to go to work the next day and it's your weekend, whatever day your weekend falls on, kind of thing, you know, and you wake up at 2 in the morning and you want to hear music, this is it. This is late night. You know, it's the lack of, there's no bass or drums here. There's no rhythm section. And originally, from what I read, the first album was just supposed to be John Taylor on piano and Norma Winstone on vocals. And ECM producer Manfred Eicher suggested using Kenny Wheeler on the trumpet. And Kenny was possibly recording another album at the same time, possibly for ECM. And I guess John Taylor said, well, yeah, why not? Okay. And, thus a band was born that stayed around for almost 20 years. And the only reason, we're not going to get any more from them is because of Kenny Wheeler's passing. Though, they went pretty inactive after the late 90s. Again, it's an unusual lineup, with a vocalist who usually doesn't sing words. There are some words in here, but not much. Most of the vocals is done as a melody line, and it's interesting because it's a tough thing to do when you've got a vocalist and a trumpeter to not step or clash on each other. It's not an easy task, So that's all stuff that's got to be worked out, pretty much. Or when they're improvising, they have to listen very carefully to what each other are doing. Very successful. There's not the only other thing that I can liken this album to, and the group sound in general to, is the Bar Phillips Journal Violin 2, which, although it didn't have piano, had a similar lineup with a vocalist and a saxophone player, John Sermon, and a bass player. So again, you've got no drums or anything like that, and it's that kind of ambiance that this whole group is based around. And they're just fantastic. This first album to me was, unlikely thing, and that was 77, March 77. So they were a pretty active band at the time. June 78, their second album comes out, Touchstone. Very much similar in direction as the first one. Love it. Anybody who likes the first one is probably going to like this. And if you don't dig the synthesizer stuff, you might even like this more. So, John Taylor, the pianist, is the main composer. On the first album, he even wrote this piece that I assumed was written by Kenny Wheeler, but apparently not, because it's just a piece for only trumpets and several overdub trumpets. It sounds like 3 or 4 trumpets, and it's a short little 2-minute piece. And sounds like something that would definitely be used in a movie theme. And I assumed that was written by Kenny Wheeler, but apparently not. Apparently John Taylor wrote it for Kenny to play, and John Taylor himself laid out on that. So it was all Kenny Wheeler on that one track. On this one as well, all compositions by John Taylor. Then you have the same lineup. The nice thing is that they didn't try to change members. They kept the membership. Instead of hiring somebody to do an imitation version of the horn player or whatever, they stayed true to I guess the vision of the group by keeping by only calling it Azimuth when the 3 original members were there. So once again, you've got John Taylor on piano, no synthesizer on this one. He does play organ on this, and I guess he those textures that he got from the synthesizer, probably spurred him on to wanting a bit more of those colors, maybe in his in the palette of what the band does, in the painter's palette. So the organ is nice. It certainly adds something to the group. He doesn't use it in the way that the synthesizer did, because the synthesizer was just the more repetitive sequencer. Here, he's actually, there's times when he's not playing piano and he's substituting the organ there. And he's using the sustained chords on the organ. But it's a little more tart and a little harder to possibly to get into. Angular or whatever. Not incredibly difficult, but, there's moments of pure beauty on here and nice improvisations. And there's a little dark, some of those organ chords, those clusters, get a little dark and dissonant almost. And I'm sure that's exactly what he was trying for, and I love that in music in general. It's not a bad thing, but it's maybe slightly less accessible, and who cares? Some people want it as dark as possible. Quite often, I'm one of those people. The next album, they did do something different, but they were pretty much doing an album a year here. Here's December 1979. Depart. I had to buy this as a friggin' import. Wouldn't you know it? At this point, some of the ECMs were not getting released in this country, and you had to buy them as imports, which was kind of frustrating, because some of them I just never saw and could never get. And this was one of them. And, with this kind of lineup, I didn't, think they were going to sell records like the Pat Metheny Group or something like that. But I thought having had 2 albums prior to this, that they might get to be released at least in the U.S., but no, I had to buy it as an import, and it took me a while to get this. Different in terms of direction only because this is the only album that they brought a guest on. Ralph Towner plays guitar. Ralph Towner's a good choice. Obviously, it changes the context of the music, and with the 4th musician there, there's a lot more going on. It's obviously not quite as sparse. Same lineup, I believe. Yeah, John Taylor again wrote everything on this. December '79, as I said. Norma Winstone still on voice, Kenny Wheeler, flugelhorn trumpet, Ralph Towner playing his just acoustic and classical nylon string guitars. So that's a nice complementary sound. Not that an electric guitar wouldn't work, but it would, obviously that timbre changes what's going on. So the acoustic guitar and the nylon string guitar fits in very well with the concept overall. John Taylor's, again, he is playing some organ on this. And this has got a few tracks that are sections of a longer piece, but they don't really seem all that related, and they're shorter. They run shorter. So it's not all longer tracks that you kind of sit and get into. It's much more broken up. It's a fairly long album for vinyl, too. I think it's about 50 minutes or so. Good album, and very different in their discography because, that balance when you bring in a 4th musician. And Towner is playing a lot of single lines and single notes and things like that. So he's not really playing in a rhythmic fashion. So, you've already got 3 solo, now you've got 3 soloists in the band. You've got a, pianist who plays solos, which would make it 4. You've got a vocalist, and you've got a horn player, and you've got the guitarist actually doing a lot of, single line, single note things. So it's not at all, you see guitar and you think maybe it's strumming and maybe it's more rhythmic. It's not. This is, not a rhythmic exercise at all. It's clearly in the same vein as the first 2 albums. But again, with guitars in there, it lends a different color. And I'm doing this the wrong way. And that was, the weird thing is just as they really seem to be doing like an album a year, they stopped. This is the CD reissue of those. Look, they used the cover image from the 2nd album. I wish they would have used the cover image of the 1st album, which I wanted to talk about. But there's 3 CDs, double wide set there. You couldn't buy these separately. When they came out on CDs, they did the 3 strictly as this little box set. Which was fine with me. Maybe a little bit expensive for people that want to dip their toes in the water. I just want to say this is, I'm not quite sure why. This is one of my favorite album covers of all time. I'm not 100% sure even what that is. I think it's a buoy out in the middle of nowhere. Obviously, used to warn ships or whatever. Probably with a light on top, so, and obviously this is a daytime shot, so you can't tell. I guess that's what it is. The other thing that it looks like, from a very far distance, is it almost looks like a lighthouse that's just, that's not situated on land. It looks like it's just in the middle of the water there. Obviously a photo taken from a helicopter, I'm guessing. Quite interesting, though. A little bit unusual for an ECM album cover, and I love that cover. I'm so glad to have this vinyl now, just because of the cover, because it's not reproduced on the CD reissue at all, and it obviously would lose something. You need to see all that water and that little object in there. Why do I love that cover so much? I don't know why I love some of the covers I do so much. But so that was December '79, and the band seemed to just kind of come to a bit of a grinding halt there. I read many years later that John Taylor said that, despite the fact that they didn't record, for a big chunk of time, that they were playing gigs. They played some gigs at least every single year after '79, or since the creation of the band, right up until probably the whenever that quote was, which probably would have been the early '90s, I'm guessing. And it was odd, so they would perform a certain amount of gigs, and they were all doing solo things as well. After the 3rd album, the '79 album, but for whatever reason didn't record. And John Taylor was still writing, and most of these compositions, if not all of them, are his. So it's a bit strange that ECM wouldn't push them toward the studio again. It took them until March of '85 to record their next album. It's 5 years. And here's another. This is also one of my favorite album covers of all time. How can you not like that cover? I love it. And they even call it Azimuth 85, as if to say, hey, we know we've been gone for a while. Let's just see there. Again, there's a piano and organ on here, but John Taylor, very little organ. He's really peeling back on using the organ, which is a shame, but this is, I want to say, probably, my favorites change. I love that first album. I don't think you ever topped that. This might be my second favorite album of theirs. Don't quite know why, but it just is. All of these albums, all of them from this band, they're late night listening. This is the kind of stuff it's a little hard to listen to in your car because there's no drums, there's no rhythm, and there's not a lot of wild stuff going on. And if you were to listen to this while you were driving, you'd probably find yourself going 10 miles an hour in the fast lane, people beeping at you, which is actually what I love about the music. The music sounds like this picture. I would attempt to get anybody that's into adventurous music into this group. I really would. They don't have to necessarily be jazz fans. If they're jazz fans, whatever, maybe it depends on the kind of jazz they like, I guess. But the lineup is a little weird for people, I guess, to hear so much vocal things going on when there's no lyrics. And I was wrong about this. Actually, here is finally the first album where Kenny Wheeler wrote one of the tracks. And it has lyrics on it, written by somebody, Jane White, probably somebody Kenny Wheeler knows. So, and all the other tracks, the just one track, are John Taylor compositions. But you are getting a little bit of Kenny Wheeler in there then. I really like this album. Then, no more albums, in terms of vinyl anyway. There's another gap. That was '85. Don't hear anything from them for a long time. And then in April '94, they recorded another album, which didn't come out until '95. So 10 years. And this only came out on CD. I'm pretty sure this only came out on CD. And this is their last album. Called How It Was Then. Nice, interesting cover. For this one, this is their most different album. At this point, John Taylor had dropped using any electric keyboards at all and was just playing acoustic piano. Obviously, Norma Winstone is still there singing. And I don't see the songwriting credits. Oh yeah, here we go. Oh yeah, okay. On this one, Kenny Wheeler and Norma Winstone actually wrote a tune together. It's not the traditional type of Azimuth album. There's quite a bit of lyrics on here, quite a bit of shorter tunes. John Taylor, he's still writing some pieces on his own, but Norma Winstone is actually co-writing with him, probably the lyrics. And Kenny Wheeler is writing with Norma Winstone, and they also do an Irving Berlin standard, How Deep Is the Ocean, which is really out of left field if you know this band at all. And they do a cover piece also by pianist Bobo Stenson, which was very unusual for them to do. And there's a whole bunch of lyrics on this. And the thing is it almost doesn't have, despite the lineup staying the same, there's piano and voice and trumpet. This is almost a mainstream jazz album. If you had somebody that, you had to play an Azimuth album for whatever reason, and they were only mainstream jazz fans, and the other stuff is too far out, this would be the one to play. But for a lot of people I've seen, it's probably their least favorite because it goes so far from their sound, so much toward a more conventional jazz sound. It's not bad music; it is good music, and there's good composition, and it's just one of those things that, hey, I had 4 or 5 albums prior to this, that I was used to. I knew what they did, and it worked in a more abstract music, certainly impressionistic, but certainly, bordering there on abstract a lot of times. And there's no abstract here whatsoever. This is very close to a pure jazz recording. Sadly, it was their last. Now, what I didn't know, just about their last, in name at least, what I didn't know is all this time, without the internet, how would you know these things? And as much as I would occasionally try to find something to read on them, I had no idea that John Taylor and Norma Winstone were married. And I think that might have facilitated the breakup of the band because they split up, I guess. That was, very sad because it probably meant the end of the group, which is a shame. However, and just to show that I support these guys, I bought every single CD of every album that I have as well, and I like the cover. 2 albums that the hardcore ECM fans might not know about, though. They didn't do them in the Azimuth name, and again, they're very different. But what's the date on this? I found it before. Now that the camera's rolling, I can't find. 1997. So that was after their last album, which was 95. The 3 of them, Kenny Wheeler, Norma Winstone, John Taylor, with the Maritime Jazz Orchestra. However, Siren Song, which is actually a title of one of the pieces on their earlier album. Big jazz band. They recorded now. They don't use the Azimuth name, which is a bit strange. They used all 3 of their individual names. And odd. I'm not a huge fan of big bands too, so that may have something to do with it. And these are obviously written out charts. There's like 4 or 5 trumpet players in the supporting band, 4 trombone players, sax players. This is a huge band, and bass player and drummer too, and a guitarist. So, hearing Azimuth music with bass and drums and even a little guitar and this, big band, brass behind them is quite unusual. And it certainly is a labor of love, whoever wrote all the charts for this. And, if you're a fan of Azimuth, you really owe it to yourself to hear these things, but it's just so different. Hearing the loud, blaring, type of big band, especially big jazz band. This is on the Just in Time label. That's the label name, and it looks like they're a Canadian label. But again, Azimuth only has those 5 albums, so it's like, hey, give me more, thank you, I'll take it. So that was 97. 2002. Which is, quite another gap, and no more Azimuth albums. They did another one with the Maritime Jazz Orchestra. Took me a while to find this. And again, it's the same group. It's Kenny Wheeler, it's John Taylor, it's Norma Winstone. I love that cover, too. Is this on Just in Time? Yeah, this is on Just in Time again, Quebec, Canada. Same thing. Huge band, guitar, bass, drums, multiple trombones, trumpets, a big saxophones, big jazz band. These are this is a little unusual because there's only 4 tracks on here. One of them is almost a half hour long. All 3 were written by Kenny Wheeler, only 1 by John Taylor. So it's almost it's Azimuth, with a big band, but more of a Kenny Wheeler Azimuth production than a John Taylor Azimuth production. Whereas the first one was also there's a lot of Kenny Wheeler pieces on this one as well. A couple John Taylor things, but again, this was the big band, playing, with Azimuth, as seen through kind of the prism of Kenny Wheeler's impressions of the band, maybe, as opposed to John Taylor, who started the group. But very interesting, and if you have a particular love of big bands, the colors that they bring there are really, really something. And just to stay with the thread a little bit, naturally loving these musicians, especially, I got into Azimuth probably about 79, and so at that time I only had the first 2 albums by them and wanted more, so I know I've shown this in my, vinyl that I wish I had on CD. Actually Norma Winstone's first solo album, from 71, I want to say it's 71, on the Argo record label, which was Decca Records, apparently. And I don't know if I mentioned on the other one, but John Taylor played on this as well. Did Kenny Wheeler play on this? Yeah, Kenny Wheeler plays on this as well. So these guys knew each other, long before and played with each other. There's a big band in here. It's not just the 3 of them. There's a lot of musicians on here. But John Taylor, the entire Azimuth band is here. This is different because this is a big band stuff. It's actually probably closer to the last couple albums they did with the Maritime Jazz Orchestra. Interestingly, after the Azimuth '85 album, you had that 10-year layoff. Norma Winstone on ECM does an album called Somewhere Called Home. And the interesting thing with this album is that it's almost an Azimuth album. If you had substituted, if Kenny Wheeler had left the group or whatever, and they decided to continue on with Tony Coe, who is a clarinet and tenor saxophone player, replacing him, so it's another wind instrument. It's not a trumpet, but it's a wind instrument. You would have an Azimuth album because this is only a 3-piece. This is just Norma Winstone on voice and John Taylor on piano. And the third guy there is Tony Coe. And again, there's no bass, there's no drums, very much like an Azimuth album, just without Kenny Wheeler. And though in this case, there's not a whole lot of, there's mostly covers. There's mostly tunes, some of which were instrumental, including one by the Brazilian guitarist Egberto Gismonti, that Norma heard and loved the tune and then wrote lyrics to it. So she's singing the melody from the original tune, but wrote lyrics to it. She also does some jazz standard things and some things that she co-wrote, oddly enough, with Kenny Wheeler, even though he doesn't play on this album. She also wrote lyrics to Celesta, a Ralph Towner instrumental piece that apparently she heard and loved and decided to write lyrics to. She does an Arlen Mercer tune, Out of This World, jazz standard thing. T for Two, so maybe it's not really, with T for Two on here, maybe it's really not an Azimuth album. But you get that same audio sensibility because you've got her voice, you've got John Taylor's piano, and you've got just a horn player. In this case, it's saxophone, clarinet. But it's that same sensibility. There's a sparseness there. There's a beauty there. There's that lack of a rhythm section that obviously changes the tonal color. And there's a fairly cute picture. I have a bit of a crush on her, I must admit, even though she's not traditionally pretty necessarily, but she's fine by me. What else? Those are the only vinyls I think that I have. But Norma has continued. And here's an interesting thing. Here's a 2008 CD. It might have been recorded 2007, but another Norma Winstone solo album on ECM. And this is the weird thing. All these years later, she still seems to like that trio setting. Here she is on voice with somebody who's apparently an Italian pianist. I'm not even going to attempt his name. But piano, basically filling in ex-husband John Taylor's role. And Klaus Gessing on bass, clarinet, and soprano saxophone. So not only is it exactly like the last album, Somewhere Called Home, which here's a CD edition of it, but it's a similar musical lineup. Almost exactly the same lineup. Again, no bass, no drums. It's got the sparseness of just having piano, voice, and a horn instrument. Even though the other two supporting musicians, are different from this album to this album, it's exactly the same colors, exactly the same vibe and feeling. So she must, through the Azimuth years, Norma must have really developed a love of that sparseness of sound. And that was 2008, and that's another good album. John Taylor, There's one that I pulled that I wanted to. He's got a CD that is him playing a huge church organ, and it's very cool. It's kind of haunting, and I think there's a. Damn it! I meant to pull it, and I can see where it would be sitting from here. I think there's a horn. I think it's a duet with a trumpet player whose name I don't recall, and so it's just trumpet and church organ, which is very different. Very, it's out there. It's cool though. It's really cool. So John Taylor has done a lot of side projects. He's a lot of people's preferred pianist, it seems. It looks like I completely forgot to pull my John Taylor stuff. Yeah, I did. I forgot to pull my John Taylor stuff. But I will show. Kenny Wheeler is, very well known. Obviously, probably better known outside of Azimuth, to be honest with you. Here's an early ECM. This is from 77, I think, 78, 78. There's, a group. This is a decent-sized band. Jan Garbrick on saxophones. John Abercrombie on electric guitar and electric mandolin. Ralph Towner makes an appearance on 12-string guitar. Jack DeJohnette on drums. Dave Holland on bass. This is considered one of those early ECM classics, by the way. So Kenny Wheeler has definitely done his own thing, to wide acclaim. Here's another ECM from the 90s, 97, Angel Song. This was fairly well received. Very pretty album. Kenny Wheeler again, with Lee Conant on saxophone, somebody from the older generation, fine saxophone player, hasn't recorded a whole hell of a lot for ECM, but a great band. Dave Holland on upright bass, and Bill Frisell on electric guitar. No drummer. So this is a nice. I think people like this one because it didn't have a drummer. Quiet. Not real sparse, but with that lack of drums, it's a nice drifty, late night album to listen to. And here's one that's got a fantastic cover. This is not on ECM. This is on Soul Note. Came out in '97. And All the More, this is called. This is pretty. Look at that cover. I really love that painting. So this is one that maybe some people may have missed from '97. And the band is, there's a guy named John Taylor playing piano on here. Fantastic. I'm so mad I didn't grab my John Taylor CDs now, and I can see them from here, and I'm so tempted to just rummage over there and grab them. But this is a nice album. John Taylor on piano. Another Italian bass player whose name I'm not going to try to pronounce. I should have worked on it first. And Joe LaBarbera on drums. So it's a little more of a conventional jazz quartet, drums, bass, piano, flugelhorn, trumpet. Doing all compositions by Kenny Wheeler, except there's two cover tracks. But look at that cover. Man, that would be something to have on a nice 12-inch vinyl, wouldn't it? Now, John Taylor has no shortage of solo albums, most of which are not recorded for ECM. He's done some solo piano things. He's done a lot of piano trios with the pretty standard piano trio lineup of bass and drums. I love his writing. I would love to see him do something outside of the piano, bass, and drums lineup, only because I think his writing is maybe better suited for something in a way without a rhythm section. That's why those early Azimuth albums in particular just knocked me out. His writing's fantastic, and I use that term far too much, but it's true. And the only way that I'm going to stop using that term is if I start showing you albums I don't like, which I can do. But there's a lot of John Taylor stuff out there, and that one that I'll look it up that has him on the big old church organ thing is really a kind of out there wild classic. This is great late night music, the Azimuth stuff. And if you're not familiar with them and you're into adventurous jazz, try something by them. It's a little tough because those first three albums, which I really, in a lot of ways think they're the best. I think the later ones are even out of print. The problem is, you're laying out a lot of money for a 3 CD set of something you haven't heard or not sure you like. I think if you can get the Azimuth 85 CD or album if you can find that, or even the vinyl albums of the first three individually. A good place to, start. But anyway, I wanted to do an Azimuth thing, and I might be running out of stuff to video. I don't know. I tried to do one yesterday using my tablet, taking a journey into my garage studio, and it crapped out on me. I cannot get that. It's got a video camera on. I'm supposed to be able to take videos. And I'm in the middle of filming, and it just stops on me. And the thing is barely used. It's less than a year old. I've not been able to get a video out of that. Which if I can, and I can get that working, I can maybe actually film somewhere else besides my bedroom here. Okay, guys. Thanks for listening. Didn't mean to go on 40 minutes. I really thought I'd keep it under a half hour. So hopefully this is, you're probably already drifted off to sleep. Enjoy anyway, guys. I hope you're all having a great day. Thanks for all the comments and for paying attention and being friends to me. I really appreciate it. And I'll be back all too soon, guys. Take care.